It is a very dangerous time to be a Christian. Torture, beheadings, destruction of...
the highest level of persecution of Christians.
A church congregation barricading themselves in from hundreds of riot police.
Christians are enduring attacks for their faith like
Along with
never
the savage
before.
kidnappings of Christian schoolgirls in Nigeria by Boko Haram and the burning of Christian images of violence dominate headlines.
Christians are being warned they have a choice: convert to Islam, pay a very steep price, or face death.
Chilling new video showing the beheading of 21 Egyptian Christians.
Beheadings of 21 Christians.
21 Christian men beheaded by Islamic State.
The title of the video is a message signed with blood to the nation of the cross.
We have seen the sharpest jump in violent attacks against Christians. We need to make the persecuted church an issue of prayer.
Which is the most persecuted religious group in the world today? The answer, in terms of sheer numbers and sheer horror, might surprise you. It's Christians, specifically Christians living in Muslim-majority countries, countries where Christians often preceded Muslims by centuries. I'm not talking about war on Christmas type harassment. I'm talking about know your place or we're going to kill you persecution. Astonishingly, the Western mainstream media barely acknowledge what is happening. Let's look closer at this issue. It tells us a lot about the world we're living in. 100 years ago, 20% of North Africa and the Middle East, the birthplace of Christianity, was Christian. Today, Christians make up 4% of the population. Much of that decline has occurred in the last decade. In essence, Muslims are rendering North Africa and the Middle East free of Christians. Take Egypt, for example, my ancestral homeland. In just the past 2 years, tens of thousands of Christian Copts have left Egypt. And many others want to leave, but they simply cannot afford to. Why they want to leave is no mystery. On New Year's Day, 2011, the Two Saints Church in Alexandria was bombed, leaving 23 Copts dead and 97 injured. In recent years, dozens of Coptic churches have been attacked, many burned to the ground. In August 2013 alone, the Muslim Brotherhood and its supporters attacked and destroyed some 80 churches. Unfortunately, Egypt is more the rule than the exception. Hundreds of Nigerian churches have been destroyed in recent years, with especially deadly attacks reserved for Christmas and Easter church services, leaving dozens dead or mutilated. Churches have been bombed or burned in Iraq, Syria, and just about every place in the Middle East where churches still exist, except Israel. Christian businesses have been torched, Christian girls have been kidnapped, sold as child brides or slaves, and had acid thrown in their faces for not being veiled. Anyone born a Muslim who converts to Christianity faces jail and possibly execution. The list of fresh atrocities by Muslims against Christians grows longer almost every day. Even in Muslim countries often portrayed as moderate, Morocco, Indonesia, Malaysia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Christian minorities are under legal pressure not to build churches or evangelize. The Christians in these Muslim countries are often identical to their co-citizens in race, ethnicity, national identity, culture, and language. There is no political dispute between the Christians and Muslims, no land dispute. Vastly outnumbered and politically marginalized, these Christians simply wish to worship in peace. Instead, they are hounded and attacked. So then, why is this happening? And why is the media making so little mention of it? The first question is easy to answer. Christians are being persecuted in Muslim countries because they're Christians, or as the Quran puts it, infidels. That is, non-Muslims who are regarded by many fundamentalist Muslims as inferior. As a fundamentalist interpretation of the holy books of Islam has grown in the last 50 or so years, Christians have suffered, and in recent years they have suffered terribly. I document this in my book, Crucified Again, Exposing Islam's New War on Christians. If this were happening to any other group besides Christians, it would be the human rights tragedy of our time. There would be loud worldwide calls for action. But the silence in the mainstream Western media is, as they say, almost deafening. Why? Because Muslim persecution of Christians throws a wrench in the media's narrative that Muslim violence is a product of Muslim grievance. That grievance is, first and foremost, portrayed as the sin of European colonialism and alleged American imperialism. In the Muslim world's mind, those two sins are personified by the Jewish state of Israel, a nation the Muslim world believes was forced upon it by the colonial powers of Europe following World War II and is currently supported by the United States. Much of the Western world and the Western media have largely bought at least some of this narrative. Here's how it works. Because Israel, with the backing of the United States, is stronger than its Muslim neighbors, the media, while not defending Islamic terrorism, often portray terror against Israel, America, and even Europe as the actions of understandably angry underdogs fighting for what they deem justice. But what happens to this media narrative when Islamic terror is directed against a minority weaker than them? In this case, the millions of indigenous Christians throughout the Islamic world. The answer is that rather than abandon this narrative, the media just don't report Muslim persecution of Christians, except for the most sensational cases. That's why you probably don't know that there are barely any Christians living in Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, nations where Christianity once thrived, or that this is happening in Egypt, Iraq, Iran, and even Lebanon. So yes, Christians are indeed the most persecuted religious group in the world today, but reporting it would violate the media's narrative of Christians as persecutors and Muslims as victims.
Hello everyone and welcome to The Vortex, where lies and falsehoods are trapped and exposed. I'm Michael Voris, coming to you from Rome, just outside St. Peter's Square and Bernini's fabulous colonnade. Many people, faithful Catholics, are very disturbed by the prospects of a coming persecution. Certainly on a human level, that's the appropriate response. This will unfold in various ways. Certainly it has already begun on a societal level. For example, in most of the industrialized world, if you say anything about sodomy being immoral, you will be labeled by friends and family as a kook. You get marginalized. It's still unofficial at this point, but you are marginalized nonetheless. Now when that moves to a slightly more formal setting, say like a job, you stand to perhaps lose your job for saying something like that along those lines. In fact, a number of corporations in the U.S., for example, have begun letting their employees know that the company line is to accept and even promote same-sex sodomy relationships, and the unspoken reality is you better toe the line. In fact, it's not so unspoken, depending on what company you might work for. When it comes to the federal government, contracts being handed out, for example, Obama has imposed his edict that you can't be awarded a government contract if your company doesn't celebrate sodomy. Then there is the further escalation up from the formal scale with cases where sticking to your religious beliefs can get you sued, such as the case with Catholic schools who make hiring and firing policies based on adherence to Catholic teaching. The push is on and will achieve a whole new reality when the U.S. Supreme Court puts its seal of approval at the end of June on homosexual sexual activity as marriage. This is all preparing the ground for persecution. The time will come at your job, in the courts, somewhere, someplace, soon, where you will have to offer a pinch of incense to the gods of sex in a sex-crazed culture or face being officially ostracized.
Copy, active shooter at UCC, 1140 Umpqua College Road. 1174, medical aid. This is for an active shooter at UCC.
Are you a Christian? He would ask them. And if you're a Christian, stand up. And they would stand up, and he said, good, because you're a Christian, you're going to see God in just about 1 second. And then he shot and killed them.
The gunman wounded 9 other people before taking his own life.
The gunman left a manifesto that revealed his intent. The manifesto reportedly had 666 written on it, and the gunman said he wanted to, quote, serve darkness.
Do you really believe that Christians are facing the same kind of attacks here in America as Jews did in Nazi Germany?
Well, what's interesting is, and I'm not saying we're gassing anybody just yet, but I will say this, and I think the thing that caught your attention is that there were laws that were passed prior to the Holocaust, beginning in 1933, and it itemizes this in a book called The World Must Know. I wrote about it 10 years ago in The Criminalization of Christianity, and these laws that were enacted between 1933 and 1939, the first one said that that non-Aryans could not be notaries, they couldn't be teachers in state schools, and that was the first of 400 separate pieces of legislation that defined, isolated, excluded, segregated, and impoverished German Jews. Comparing the laws that were passed beginning in 1933, which is very similar to what we're facing right now, where Jindal says we're not allowed to be elected officials. It's not breaking the law to exercise our constitutional rights, and yet we see Christians going to jail. Well, let's see what's happening right now, where you have bakers that are being impoverished. You look at Aaron and Melissa Klein from Sweet Cakes. They're being told that they've got to pay over $100,000 in fine. They've lost their business, but that's not enough for the homosexual activists. They want them to pay. It's not enough that they could go and get their cake anywhere else in town, but they want to force Christians to violate their conscience. Well, what I'm saying is that those laws are strikingly similar, and when you look at the fact that we've got Christians that are being forced out of business, we have Christians now going to jail. By the way, in my